All right. So the plan for today is pretty straightforward. We're finishing up our chapter on pollution. And pollution is sort of interesting in its own right. You know, it's arguably bad. We talked about some of the ways it's bad, ranging from, harming the environment to aesthetically displeasing to, its impact on the biosphere. But there are also elements of pollution that we might argue are good, whether they induce us to be more innovative, whether pollution, is the sign of increased economic activity, which we might think of as good, for lack of a better term. Um, but it's also useful for us to abstract from pollution, because what pollution is an externality. And to bring it back, just so everyone is up on our Econ 101 definition, externalities are costs or benefits. There are positive externalities of a market activity that impact a third party. In other words, they're a non-market outcome of market activities. So if I purchase a Snickers bar from the store and I crumple up that Snickers wrapper and throw it on the ground, that resulting pollution, one might argue, is a negative externality. But there are positive externalities as well. So you are all purchasing a college degree from Sweetbriar, and we hope that this degree makes you a better, more engaged, more informed citizen, and that you go and benefit the world as a result. That's an externality. There are third-party people who are going to be influenced or affected by the fact that you have a college degree that did not interact in that market transaction. That's a positive externality. And when we think about pollution, we can think about it as this very specific thing of waste or byproduct, but we can think about it more broadly in the sense of externality overall. Everyone with me so far? And just to keep us up to speed on just these Econ 101 definitions of externalities, one of the ways that we deal with externalities in econ is what we refer to as the Coase theorem, because Ronald Coase wrote it, won a Nobel Prize for it. And what the Coase theorem says is we can correct for externalities by having people negotiate over property rights. So what this says more generally is the way we correct for externalities is by having people internalize those external costs. And the Coase theorem, and I'm going fairly quickly because this should be review for all of us, but what the Coase theorem says is if there's no barriers, if we can negotiate freely and property rights are fully specified, then people will bargain to internalize externalities. So pollution is usually a good example of this, both in the sense of well-functioning property rights and not well-functioning property rights. So if, for instance, the right to privacy belongs to, say, Jeff Key, who lives up Woodland Road from all of you, and someone encroaches on that privacy, he can either seek damages or auction off to you the right to encroach on his private land. The problem, where the Coase theorem might fail us, is if that right to privacy, for instance, is not fully specified. So you're a Sweetbriar student, you're welcome to roam the grounds at Sweetbriar. Some of the grounds at Sweetbriar look to be private residences. Where is the right to property there? Does it belong to you, the student, or does it belong to someone who lives on Woodland or Faculty Row? So we ended our video lecture, which got uploaded yesterday morning, with a question, which is, one concerning fairness. So do you think either with well-defined property rights or an absence thereof, do you think this is a fair system? So let's start from the bottom. Misang, do you think it's fair to bargain over externalities in the case of a well-defined property right? And if you need other examples, I can provide them.
Can you provide more examples?
Yeah, so the classic example is sort of two farmers that are next to each other. One farmer is a cattle farmer, the other farmer is a wheat farmer. So the cattle, and there's no fence in between their property. So the cattle farmer lets his cows graze freely, and as a result, those cows eat the wheat farmer's wheat. So what happens in this case? Well, if the right to that land belongs to the wheat farmer, the cattle farmer can either fence in his cows or he can pay damages to the wheat farmer. What if the property rights go the other way? What if the wheat farmer does not have the right to cattle-free fields? The wheat farmer can either pay to put up a fence or he can accept damage from the cattle. And based on these individual farmers' costs and benefits, if these rights are fully specified, the farmer who does not want to incur the damages will likely build a fence. The problem is if it's not clear where those property rights lie. So let's use this cattle and wheat farmer example. Suppose, Misang, that you are a wheat farmer and you, for whatever property laws exist in the land, do not have a right to cattle-free fields. Is it fair that the onus is on you to either accept these damages or build the fence?
I think to a certain extent it is. It would be fair for me to have to incur the damages and or build a fence on my own because there isn't a law, and if I want to make sure that I have my wheat without the damages, it would make sense to build a fence.
Christina, what if we flip it? What if it's the other way around? What if this wheat farmer does have the right to cattle-free fields? Is it fair that we can charge the cattle farmer for damages?
You're asking me, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to make sure. I thought I heard my name. So you're saying that the cattle, in this instance, the cattle farmer is in the wrong and laws are on his side?
Let's be clear. I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong, but I'm saying if the law dictates that the wheat farmer has property rights, is it fair that we are able to charge the cattle farmer for damages?
If he has property rights, then the cattle farmer should be not fined. They should be forced to pay to put up a fence or something.
Okay, so Katie, let's build on that. What if it's not clear where the property rights lie? Can you come up with a fair solution?
Yeah, I think that maybe both farmers could split the cost of the fencing if it's going to be an issue.
All right, and what happens if they don't reach that negotiation?
Well, there I feel like that would be the responsibility of the county or whatever government is in there region to step in, because if they can't settle it themselves over like a civil dispute, then that's a problem.
All right, let's see who's next on my. Grace, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Like they should split the cost, but if they can't come to a decision, and like let's say there is no governing body, then they should just both take the damages of each other's decisions.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen real quick, and you guys tell me where you think the property rights lie. Can you guys see this okay? Can anyone not see this?
Yes, we can see.
All right. So here we have this video that went viral about a half a year ago when we were still able to fly, of a woman reclining her seat on a plane and the passenger behind her repeatedly punching her seat. So where do you think the property rights lie in this situation? Annika, we haven't heard from you yet. Who's got the property rights to the seat behind, the space behind the seat on the plane?
If it's behind, then the person who's sitting there, so the guy like punching the chair, but at the same time, the seats do recline. So it kind of gives you the idea that, oh, it's okay to recline to a certain extent. But that just kind of goes back to, I guess, common courtesy, but that's not.
All right,
really
Bijou, what do
but-
you think? Who's the asshole here?
I do not think it's either party. I do believe that it is, that's why there is government is, or lawyers to kind of put that dispute, to solve that dispute. But I personally don't think that, one, the wheat farmer should pay or do half and half for something they're not responsible for. I don't think the person sitting in the chair should also be responsible for telling the other person behind them to stop. They could, but I think that that comes to a point where they need to be removed.
Who needs to be removed?
The person behind her, they need to
So-
call her air hostess, and she needs to be, or he needs to be kicked off. Like there should be a third party.
Okay, excellent point. But in this case, you know, where do the property rights lie? Does it? So it sounds like, you know, and you can all chime in, but Annika, it sounded like you were a little split, right? Understandably so. These property rights aren't clearly defined. Bijou, it sounds like you're saying, are you saying the property rights belong to the recliner, or are you saying something else?
I'm saying the property rights belong to the person sitting in the seat who had bought the ticket, and the ticket specified that their seat was row 3A, and the person behind them felt the need to start punching the chair. So
Right, so if you're in row 3A and I'm in row 4A,
yeah,
haven't I also purchased that airspace? Where do the property rights lie? And everyone, just chime in. What do you guys think?
4A.
I think that this raises a question to me of, I mean, obviously it's not publicly owned because it's owned by a private company, but that's a public space and a public service that people are sharing. So in my mind, you kind of give up your, like, you know, quote unquote personal property rights when you're sitting in a public space with other people. So but also I don't know, because I've actually been in a situation where the guy sitting next to me started doing something like that to the person in front of him because he was yawning, and he was annoyed that the guy kept yawning. And so he started punching the back of his seat and threatening to fight him once they got off the plane. So then I'm agreeing with Bijou of, okay, well, you're in this third party entity of the plane, you know, that's your public space where the plane needs to step in. So the flight attendants need to step in and remove the aggressive person. but I don't know.
All right. Anyone hasn't gone yet? Misong, what do you think? Where do the property rights lie here?
I agree with Katie.
So sounds like we're leaning on the side of some sort of, say, increased, I'll say governmental, but in this case it's, you know, the flight attendant, but some sort of increased third-party precedent, right?
The lady reclining though antagonizes it obviously, and we can kind of see that in the video by her taking that video and then proceeding to continue to lean her chair back. So it's not like she's asking for her chair to be like punched, but she's antagonizing the guy behind her by continuously moving it back. And probably maybe the first time he asked nicely, we don't know that, but I mean it seems like it continued to continue on based off of what we see in the video.
Right, certainly, and it is worth mentioning that you know, no one has full information here, right? This is like a 30-second clip that went viral, but we don't know what preceded it or what happened afterwards.
But we are also remiss in then talking about the fact that she bought that seat, and so therefore she has ownership of that seat for that time being, just as the wheat farmer bought that land and therefore is entitled to full utilization and utility of that space.
Right.
Well,
So excellent point. And it sounds like you are arguing for clearly defined property rights, but in this case, are the property rights so clearly defined? So let's draw a picture. Give me 1 second while I share the screen. So this is going to be a very ugly picture. Apologies in advance, but we've got a seat here and we've got a seat here. So who owns this space where I'm drawing this sort of pizza slice?
yeah, so that's what I was just about to say is I agree with Bijou on you have purchased that seat, you own that seat. But I think we're talking less about the seat and more about the space, which is a muddled thing when you're flying, because are you allowed to occupy the space behind you, or are you really allowed to occupy the space in front of you? You know, behind you is reclining your seat, in front of you is obviously in front of you.
Right, and Tanika's point from earlier, you buy a seat on a plane, it has a button, you know, a recline button, but it's still not clear where the property rights lie. So bargaining is perhaps one way of solving this problem, although it's difficult to start a bargain when you don't know what the property rights are. You guys have also mentioned other ways to solve this problem by bringing in some sort of third-party mediator, either a government or a figure in power. What else do you guys think? What are some other ways that we can internalize these externalities?
You could put a limit on how far back the seat reclines.
And in establishing that limit, you're also implying that, and here let's switch colors. So if I were to say seats have limited recline and they can't recline past this blue line, that would then imply that the blue area is the property of the person in front. Is that what you're saying? I mean, I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Forgetting we're talking about, you know, airplane seats or farmers, what are some other ways we can get people to internalize the externality?
Taxes.
Okay. So we can charge them more broadly speaking. It doesn't have to be taxes, but some sort of liability. What else? This is a discussion question, no right or wrong answer.
This is not I don't know, this is kind of dumb, but maybe they don't get free snacks on that flight if they were to act up.
Okay, so that's very similar to a tax, right? Like Bijou mentioned, right? There's some sort of, in this case, non-financial, but there's some thing you have to pay. In this case, you forfeit snacks. So we've got pollution. Pollution is just one form of externality. What an externality is, when there is a market failure or non-market outcome to this transaction. From here, I think it's worthwhile to open up some of the discussion questions. So we started by saying, are these outcomes fair? Let's bring it back to pollution. Is it okay that some people can buy and sell rights to pollution? Is it moral? Is it ethical? Is it fair? Is it right? Christina, what do you think?
I guess I would say that personally, I just think it's really weird. I just think there's a lot of better ways to do it other than that way. If I had to choose if it was right or wrong, I would say right, just because at least it gets the conversation going on that topic. But as a whole, I just think it's a weird way to go about figuring how pollution can be managed.
Okay, excellent point, because you're kind of leading us into our next discussion question. So we might as well tie them together if you don't mind expanding on that a little bit. You said it's not in your mind the best way. It's a little weird. It's a little, sort of, let's say, difficult or fractious. So what is the best way to get rid of pollution?
I guess I would say personally, I would think the best way to do it would go more of, in the perfect world where laws are abided by, I would say taxes and subsidies, but I don't really know.
Okay, so we'll come back to that, but are taxes and subsidies not what we were just talking about? Buying and selling the rights to pollute?
Would first,
Can you say that again?
would first having a definition as to what people are doing would be the first step? Like, we talk about pollution, but we've not really defined in a sense, like, especially for our problem set, we talked about non-point solution. There was four different types. And I think that's the best way to start, is for companies first to understand, or businesses and individuals to understand the extent of what that means, and then begin to like tackle like whether or not, like if it's non-point, you're kind of, it's intentional versus it being like runoff in a parking lot. Like that's very different. But understanding your individual application and then being able to say, okay, if you're purposely doing it, there's a higher cost than even if you are doing it, even though there is a cost.
Okay, excellent point. And true, we have been a little loose on our definition of pollution, in part because some people might think that some things are pollutants that other people don't. We can talk about noise or light pollution. But what you're suggesting sounds like you want our corrective mechanism to be tied to intent. Is that something you're comfortable with? Is that morally right? Is that ethical? Is that fair? Is that going to result in the solution that we want? And I'll punt on what that solution is. It might be some abstract number. It might be 50% less pollution. It might be, to your point, less intentional pollution. Is that something you're comfortable with?
To an extent, I think yes, it is about intent, but it is also understanding that regardless of your intent, there still is an impact. And if we're remiss in including that, then it's redundant. And so first measuring people's intent and measuring what people understand, and then and looking at the overall picture and looking at a number that is not just focused on an industry or a business that is intentionally polluting maybe, but also looking at individuals and seeing how do you balance to ensure that everyone is contributing to this effort instead of just one or the other.
Okay. So Annika, let's go back to the first question. Do you think it is ethical? Do you think it is moral to be able to buy and sell the rights to pollute? And the second question was, do you have a better solution for abating pollution? And certainly you can say, no, I don't have a better solution. That's fine.
I feel like there should be some like consequence of polluting, especially in the world we live in today. So maybe taxing those who pollute, especially those larger companies that might not even consider what they're putting out into the environment. And I think it is ethical because it is the world that everybody has to live in. So you could even go back on it just being that it's ethically correct for you to not only do something, not only thinking about yourself, but thinking about the others around you, how it'll affect them, almost like a domino effect sort of thing.
Grace, what do you think?
Going back to like buying the right to pollute, like I don't think that's fair. Like it, depending on what you think is fair, like if you're thinking fair from a business side or fair from the environmental side. But I think it's a very efficient way to bypass the problem because people obviously don't like change. So I think like imposing, like Annika said, like taxing them, but like making them very like strict and things like that, because I feel like there's no like backup to what you say. Like there's no actions to some of the like laws and implements that are in place for them,
So how, and again, there's not a right or wrong answer here, but how are you guys, both individually and as a class, differentiating pollutant rights to pollution taxes? So what's the difference between me, say, buying $5 worth of pollution tax versus me polluting, or let me say $5 worth of pollution credits versus me polluting and being charged a $5 tax? Do you view those differently? Are they isomorphic? Are they, and again, there's no right or wrong answer here. This is just a discussion.
I feel like they should be viewed differently because like the one where you're just going ahead and paying the tax, you already know, oh, if I do this, I'm going to be charged, or I'm already paying for it, I might as well go ahead and do it. Whereas the other one is where you might get caught or are seen polluting and then you're charged for that. And it might be the same price, but I would think it wouldn't be in the end. But then it's kind of, oh, I just got charged for this with a big bill. Then you might think about changing your ways rather than I'm already paying for this so I can pollute how much I want.
Anyone else? So
I agree with her.
Yeah, Christina, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was about to say I completely agree. That's how I thought about it as well. Like I feel like there's no responsibility. Like I just feel like I feel like if it's a tax, it's more like a punishment rather than you just, oh, well, I'm just gonna pay for this and just do whatever I want. I completely agree with her.
So the fact that you brought up responsibility, I think gets me to what I wanted to say, which is, Bijou, I thought your answer was really interesting. Are you comfortable with us returning to it for a little bit further discussion?
Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
What was that?
Yes, you can.
So going back to what Christina mentioned about responsibility and what you mentioned about intent. Hang on, we're about to get a visitor. How would we go about measuring intent? How can we, measure something like responsibility?
I think it's first by breaking down the individual. So looking at households and looking at businesses, industries, and having a categorical system, and then looking at the contributors to pollution, and then looking at whether households participate in this or not, whether businesses, industries. So if we say that runoff isn't part of pollutants, and that by using chemicals such as like pesticides and herbicides in someone's garden is a contributor to pollution, being able to measure how much per household is being utilized, which businesses are utilizing these chemicals, how much of it, and then being able to have a specified model that is able to see like how drastic, how far, and how much, and then be able to say this is how we're going to tax or tackle the issue.
Okay, great, but I still don't see where we're getting intent or responsibility from that. And you don't have to have an answer. That's for sure. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add to that?
I think it should just be a job considered in the company. There should just be a job specifically for tracking how they pollute or if they're taxed for polluting, things like that, and watching how they treat the environment. Kind of like a safety feature, basically.
Safety officer, compliance officer. So it sounds like that would sort of treat big companies and little companies differently. Again, totally valid answer. Is that something you're comfortable with? Again, to sort of recap for everyone, all we're talking about right now is, we've talked about pollution as this form of externality, and we're asking, do we have an appropriate way of dealing with this essentially non-market outcome? And some of the ways we've proposed have been market-based solutions, either, through the form of taxes or auctions or credits. Are those outcomes, or are those, mechanisms for dealing with them fair? They can be, they don't have to be. Do we as individuals, as environmental economists, have better ways of dealing with these outcomes? So Annika, I'll come back to you because you had mentioned that this, compliance officers or safety officers. And the specific question to you is, that sounds like something that's going to result in large companies getting treated differently than small companies. And is that something you're comfortable with in terms of correcting for this non-market outcome?
Yeah, I think it's fair because usually it is those larger companies that are doing more of the damage as compared to the smaller companies that can watch more of what they're doing, what they're putting out there.
Cool. Anyone else have anything that they want to add to the discussion overall? So also on the discussion board, we have this question from Tiffany, where she says, do you all think it's true that the faster a country develops, the more serious environmental problems it's going to cause? So Misang, we haven't heard from you in a while. What do you think?
I really don't know.
Totally valid answer. Christina, what about you? What do you think?
If based off like the faster, I would say yes.
So you think that there's an inevitable connection between environmental degradation and economic growth?
Yes. Sorry, I understood the first time, and that like the way you explained it the second time confused me. But yeah, I would say that just because I say we start losing our connection to as society grows. I feel like we lose more of our connection with each other. We become more focused on what we deem. How can I say it? What we deem we need for survival changes, and with that changes what we need to survive. So I feel like we start losing that connection.
Okay.
I don't know.
Grace, what do you think?
I sort of, in a way, I agree because I feel like the more economic growth there is, like more and more you're gonna get obsessed with like number values and money, and like those environmental concerns are gonna take like a back seat to your economic gain.
Mm-hmm. So how do we account for things like birth of clean energy coming from much more developed economies then? That's to the whole group.
Hello. I have things to say.
Yeah, please. I was trying to not call on you because of what you dropped in the chat, but welcome back,
it's
and
okay.
please chime in.
Okay. Well, first of all, Tiffany's question. So I can also put this in the discussion board because I meant to, but I kind of ran out of time. I was reading a scholarly paper today about the relationship between stock pollution and flow pollution, and I kind of just skimmed through it, so I'd have to read it again. But there was a line that said that there is a direct correlation between the rise of flow pollutants and income. So I would say yes. And then the other thing that I've been thinking of this whole time, and I genuinely cannot remember what it is, but there is a website, and we did this in sustainable systems class, so I don't know if anybody else has taken it, maybe they would remember. But the countries around the world are ranked, and they have multiple indicators. One of them is pollution, and then there are different things within the pollution indicator of like where the country's income level is, what their pollutants are, and how that correlates. And so generally the more developed countries had a higher number of or a lower score like in the area of sustainability and pollutants. So based off of that, I would say that it does have a pretty strong direct correlation. And I really would drop that link if I could, but I can't remember what it's called.
Cool. Anyone else have anything they want to add specific to Tiffany's question or general to the discussion overall?
I have that link, so I can put it in the chapter 2 discussion board.
Great. Thank you, Annika. All right. So let's fast forward to our homework, and let's start with, I guess, question 1. Who came up with an indicator that they thought was really interesting? Or alternatively, do you want to see the one that I came up with? What do you guys think?
Were we not supposed to use the ones found on the website? Or could we not use those?
No, you were supposed to use the ones on the website. So
okay, just want to make sure. I know we had like overthink about it. Okay.
Okay, so Christina, since you spoke up, let's call. What indicator did you use?
I used the frost.
Okay.
And how was it? Let me go back to my paper. How the permafrost is like seasons are decreasing.
Okay. So how is this going to affect people?
It's going to affect our food supply because it said that farmers and planters use that as a way to see basically when they should start planting certain things. So it could also just affect it. So it can affect like when food is available, and probably force us to go more GMO route to get those foods in at the same time.
Okay. And so with seasons being affected, with frost changing, what are some things that we as people can do to adapt?
We can adapt to not probably having made fruits and vegetables and having fruits and vegetables in different seasons, not as clearly as they used to be. Maybe having limited access to those fruits and vegetables, and just getting used in general to the new climate.
Okay. Did anyone else use frost as their indicator? All right, so who wants to go next? We don't have to do everyone. Grace, would you like to go?
So I didn't really do like a specific indicator. I used one of the overall graphs, and I kind of like picked out some pieces because I did the surface temperature increases.
Okay. So I think that's a good indicator, surface temperature increase. Let's hear about it. How has it changed over time?
Well, the average surface temperature in the past, I think they did 100 years or so, has like increased by an average number of like 2 degrees coming from 2020 now. Yeah, so from what it used to be, the surface temperature for land and ocean is hotter than it's supposed to be.
Okay, so how's this going to affect people?
Well, I mean, I think it would have like detrimental effects because going off what Katie said, like in sustainable systems, like we did this whole thing about how an average increase of like 2.5 or 2.7 degrees would make changes to the environment that we couldn't necessarily backtrack on, like the polar ice caps melting and like ocean ecosystems disappearing because they're not made for the warmer temperatures of the water and stuff like that. So I think just ecosystems that support human life would cease to function the way that they do.
Okay, so is there anything we can do to mitigate this? And if so, what is that?
I said on my thing that we need to do like a huge cultural reset on the way that we view global warming / climate change. So I don't think it's necessarily an adaptive thing. I think it's a reset. Like we need to hit the reset button for this issue.
Cool. Anyone else want to talk about the indicator that they chose to discuss? It's fine if you don't. All right, so if no one wants to talk about their indicator, let's move on to question 2. So let's first read it as a class, right? This is the one that a couple of you emailed about, so I think it'll be useful for us to go over it together. But imagine that there is a competitive market for bicycles. Demand for bicycles is approximated by P equals 400 minus Q. The private marginal cost of producing a bicycle is 100 plus Q. But we have some additional information, which is each bicycle causes 1 ton of carbon dioxide to be released, which we can value at $50. So first we have to find the free market equilibrium price and quantity. Does anyone want to walk me through how they set up that problem?
I can't walk you through it, but I struggled with this question, so I would appreciate if we could walk through it.
Okay. Let's walk through it together. So give me a second to share my screen. Okay, can you guys see the screen okay?
Yeah.
All right, so we've got P equals 400 minus Q. That's demand. Then we've got marginal cost equals 100 plus Q. All right, so before we even get into the external cost, the pollution, how would we set up this problem?
Would we set the 2 equations equal to each other?
Absolutely right. So this is basically just a supply and demand model. Remember, marginal cost is a supply curve above the shutdown point. So what do we know about demand? I mean in very, very general terms. Demand is downward sloping. Supply is upward sloping. We know demand intersects here at about 400. 400 minus 0 equals 400. We know that supply intersects here at about 100. I say about, but I mean exactly. 100 plus 0 is 100. So before we even set up the problem, we know that we're going to have some equilibrium price between 400 and 100. So I didn't see who said it in the chat, but to set this problem up, we just equate demand with marginal cost. So 400 minus Q equals 100 plus Q. I'm going to go a little quickly on the algebra. But that gives us, 300 equals 2Q. I moved the Q's to one side, I moved the numbers to one side. Equilibrium quantity is 150. Everyone with me so far? Now to go from equilibrium quantity to equilibrium price, we just plug that back into our demand equation. So 400 minus 150, that's 250. And we've solved for equilibrium price and quantity before we start to account for pollution. And the cool thing is, not only do we get the same thing when we use the supply equation in addition to the demand equation, but we can see already that our equilibrium price is in between those two numbers. So it looks like we're on the right track. Everyone with me so far? All right.
What number is below the 400?
300. 400 minus 100, 300. And I apologize for the terrible handwriting. All right. So the next thing it says is to write an equation for marginal social costs and to identify the socially optimal quantity. So in addition to these demand and supply equations, and give me a sec while I change pen color. In addition to these demand and supply equations, we're given some additional information. What's the additional information we have?
The social cost,
Okay, so what's the social cost?
0.5.
What's the social cost?
It's 50.
Okay, so we also know that marginal cost, and I won't say social, I'll say external here. The external cost is 50. Again, apologies for the handwriting. So we have the internal cost, we've got the external cost. So how do we go to societal cost from these two? I'm gonna change the color again. So now we want marginal cost social. I'm just gonna put an S for social. How do we get the marginal social cost when we have the internal cost and the external cost?
We'll plug in the MC equals 100 plus Q.
So sounds like you're saying set external cost equal to internal cost?
Yeah.
All right, so if we did that, that would suggest that internal cost is the same thing as external cost. But what we're trying to find is what are the costs to all of society. So when we say all of society, what are you hearing?
Does that mean that you would add the external and internal costs and set that equal to the social cost?
That's absolutely right. So Misang, you're spot on. Why don't you walk me through your intuition there?
So it would be 100 plus the Q, which was 150, plus 50 equals the marginal cost social.
Right. So since we're solving for a new Q, we're solving for a new quantity. We don't know that quantity is 150 yet. But tell me about your intuition to add external cost to internal cost to get social
Well, you
cost.
said all of society, so that would be external and internal.
Absolutely right. So now we have a new marginal cost equation. I'm just adding that 100 to 50 straight out. So the marginal social cost is 150 plus Q. Everyone with me? And that's going to look very similar to our supply curve, just with an upward shift, because now we're accounting for that pollution. Questions so far? And to get the socially optimal solution, we're doing the same thing as with the privately optimal solution. We're just we're equating marginal benefit to marginal cost. We just now have a new marginal cost curve because it's accounting for pollution. So rather than go through all the algebra, I'll just fast forward. We're going to get 250 equals 2Q, which makes sense. It's different than from the private cost by 50, a difference of 50. We're going to get Q equals 125. We're going to get a slightly higher price. And to get that price, we just plug it into our price equation. Questions so far? And the full answers will be posted on Canvas later today. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. Any other questions? All right, so let's finish quickly just by going through that last question where we want examples of different pollution. So Katie, give me an example of point source pollution.
I'm pretty sure I used point source pollution as an example as a drainage ditch right outside of a dairy farm.
Okay, and that's because you can track it to that one point, the drainage ditch. Maybe it'll be helpful if we take that answer, excellent answer by the way, and compare it to non-point source. So Christina, give me an example of non-point source pollution.
So an example of non-point source pollution. I said maybe like pesticides in like a farming town. Just because, and like the runoff from that, just because there's so many different farms, not really easy to trace.
Right, excellent point. And so we can compare this runoff from pesticides, which is going to get absorbed into the ground, make its way to our waterways, make its way to various places, to Katie's example of point source drainage ditch, where we can track everything to this one ditch. Bijou, give me an example of flow pollution.
For pollution, I said that it would be like water flowing in a parking lot, polluted water.
Okay, and why did you call that flow pollution?
Because one, we didn't know the point, like we didn't know where it was coming from, and it when it happens really quickly, and it can be in extreme amounts.
Okay, so I like where you're coming from, but we don't need to know the point to differentiate flow and stock. Remember, flow and stock are questions of how quickly they get assimilated into the environment. So water could be a source of flow pollution if it has a place to flow to, but if, say, it pools up in puddles, maybe it's a source of stock pollution. So let's compare your answer to Grace. Give me the example you gave for stock pollution.
For stock pollution, I said the buildup of non-biodegradable items like plastic and things like that.
Great, because they don't get assimilated by the environment very quickly, if at all. So let's, just with our last 2 minutes here, let's take a minute to sort of compare all four examples we have. What can we learn about the pollution by identifying either its source or its form of accumulation? And I guess more broadly, if I tell you that something is sort of a quickly assimilated, so a flow point source of pollution, might you propose a different way of dealing with it than say a non-point source or a stock pollution? So Christina, what do you think?
Can you say the question one more time?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, I just want us to compare the four examples we just got. But one of the ways we might compare these four examples is if we approach different ways to abating these forms of pollution.
Can I pass?
Yeah, of course. Annika, do you want to go?
Can you word the question differently? And
Yeah, so let's just say, why don't you take a minute to compare and contrast these four different types of identifying pollution that we just talked about. And the four types, just to bring everyone to the same page, are flow and stock, and point source and non-point source.
okay. So the difference is how they're put out into the environment. So I guess the examples I put, like for point source, I did like a sewage treatment plant, which is purposely put out into the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like, I guess stock, it's for the example I used were the non-biodegradable plastic, where those aren't necessarily purposely put in the environment. And then they're both going to be different ways of cleaning up those different toxins that are put out.
Excellent point. So we need to consider not only how they're put out, but why they're put out, and that's going to lead us to different implications for cleaning them up. And with that, it's just about 3:50. So everyone, go have a great weekend. Your essay questions for next week are up there. Keep emailing me questions if you have any, and we'll regroup on Monday.